Jonathan Metzl is a researcher, he's an author, he's a doctor. He's professor and director of the Center for Medicine, Health, and Society at Vanderbilt University, and is the author of Dying of Whiteness. Jonathan Metzl, welcome.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here.
I want to get to the gun thing. I know they brought me here to talk to you about guns, and I do want to talk about guns, but your book has a lot of stuff related to this issue that's also tied up with a lot of things I think that represent what America is going through right now, and maybe it's been going through for a long time, and that's political identity or personal identity as reflected in politics.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, in the book, basically, I talk about the negative health effects of politics and policies that claim on their face to make white America great again. And what I show in the book is that those policies are as dangerous for all working class people, including working class white supporters, as are asbestos or not wearing seatbelts in cars or secondhand smoke. They literally become health risks. And so part of the book is kind of telling the story of how things like pro-gun, anti-government, anti-healthcare kind of politics became these mainstream politics when really they're so dangerous for everybody, including the people that they're claiming to help.
Yeah, in fact, you make the point in the book that people are willing to, they'd rather die than give up their political identity.
Well, it's really the point is about how issues that seem to be kind of counterintuitive from a health standpoint. I mean, why would somebody reject their own health care? And so in the book, I interview people in Tennessee, for example, who are very, very medically ill. But this sense of white identity, this idea that undeserving immigrants and minorities are going to come and take away resources that are due to them, really blocks their understanding of how something like the Affordable Care Act would benefit them. And so I really did talk to people literally on death's doorstep, and it's not like a slam on them. It was really look at how deeply this idea, this pathological notion of what it means to be white has become, that you're not only blocking things that you think are going to be beneficial for other people, but they're actually shortening your own lifespan. Really, the story of the book is how the politics that claim to bolster whiteness end up shortening white lifespans.
No, that's exactly the point. One of the things I love about what you've done is that you're not banging on that part of society that's suffering at the hands of these policies. Rather, you're kind of treating it as a social and medical phenomenon.
And with again, I'm from Missouri. I live in Tennessee now. It's not like I was going into some alien planet. I have a lot of friends all across the political spectrum, and I really wasn't trying to blame anybody. I was just trying to say, like, look at how boxed in we are by what Du Bois once called the wage of whiteness. That in a way we've created these systems that are just bringing us all down. The part of the book is about healthcare. Another part is about cuts to the education system and talking about people who were so afraid that other kinds of people were going to come into the education system that they were willing to support budget cuts that impacted their own kids' schools. And everybody suffered. That was in Kansas. And then a good part of the book is about guns and how this idea that basically guns that come to symbolize these powerful symbols of white identity end up having profound effects across society. But the biggest, the main death in the gun research I did shows that the people who die the most are white men from gun suicide. And so it's this kind of double-edged sword of the symbol of patriotism or power or privilege that ends up also being the profound health risk.
Again, the book is Dying of Whiteness, and Jonathan Metzl. Now let's talk about guns a little bit more, because you've mentioned it, and that is so much a part of it, that it seems as though identity, machismo, displaced insecurity or concerns or anxiety about virility and these other things, that's all wrapped up in guns, the size of the guns, how many guns people have, et cetera.
Well, that's certainly on everybody's mind, because we just saw a march in Virginia where people were walking around with 5-foot guns and, rocket launchers and pretty much everything. And so, I think it's important to note that the question is, that was 20,000 people in Virginia. That doesn't represent everybody who's a gun owner. Everybody who's a gun owner doesn't have a racist sign that they're holding up. But I do think that there's this shift that's happened in society. If you go back about 15, 20 years ago, people owned guns for hunting. According to Pew opinion polls, that was about 75% of gun owners. They had a family history of having guns passed down. They kept the guns just in case of emergency, things like that. And there's been really a radical shift in this country in which over those past 20 years, guns have really become these profound symbols of identity, particularly white identity. And the reason people have owned guns has shifted from hunting to protecting themselves against other people. If you interview gun owners now, it's kind of like, a carjacker, a gangbanger, stuff like that, according to some of the research that I've done. And so really this idea of what guns symbolize in this country has shifted alongside just a massive proliferation of many more guns coming into people's homes and into the public.
And the ability to research and discuss this has changed as well. I mean, the Dickey Amendment is something that explain to everyone how that's changed the nature of research being done about this.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. I talk about this a lot in the book, that basically in the mid-1990s, there were two pretty important research studies that came out that were published in mainstream medical journals that basically said owning a gun and having a gun in your home increases the risk of having a shooting in your home, usually a domestic shooting. And it would be hard to have a shooting in your home if there was no gun. So it seemed like a kind of self-evident kind of claim. There's another study that showed that having a gun in the home increased the risk of having a gun suicide in the home. So these were pretty non-controversial kinds of claims, but these were taken up by the NRA at the time and basically said all public health research is anti-gun or showing an anti-gun bias. And for since the mid-1990s, there's been effectively a federal ban on gun research. You can't do federally funded, CDC-funded, NIH-funded kinds of gun research, which really asks the question, how do we keep people safe? And that's changed a little bit recently with Congress, a couple of months ago. But basically, for the past 30 years, we haven't built the kinds of databases that would help us answer the question of how can we have a country that respects the Second Amendment on one hand and stops what we have now, which is an epidemic rate of gun death on the other.
There just seems to be such a pitched battle around these gun issues that a polarizing that's become even more extreme, that it locks out all of these different treatments. And you discuss the different ways that this gun problem, if you will, the problem of people getting shot and killed has been tackled. I mean, you talk about the social, really attacking it from a health standpoint and attacking it from other standpoints. I wonder if you could speak to those different strategies in treating this problem.
Sure. Well, again, I think what we've gotten in the aftermath of this Dickey Amendment and other things that have happened in society is really such an unfortunate polarization in which you're either pro or anti-gun. There's no middle ground. You're either with those Virginia protesters or you're totally against them and what they represent. And so, I guess in my research, when I was in Missouri for quite a long time, talking to many gun owners, sitting in on groups. People were, kind enough to let me talk to them. And I really found that there was such a need for a middle ground. In other words, how can somebody be pro-gun or have a history of guns, but also, people ask me, even in the most pro-gun areas, how can we keep our families safe? How can we keep our communities safe? And this issue has become so polarized. And it's true for public health also. I mean, public health in a way has to research these issues like just really obvious things, pro or anti-gun kinds of things. And so really what I argue in the work that I do is how can we get back to a center on this issue? We're a country that has a Second Amendment, and we also have a profound need for public safety. And so in the work I do, I say that in order for research to re-enter that space, we can't just say, here's a policy that's going to work and we're going to, make you do it. It's also to talk to people about what do guns mean? How can we break down polarization? How can we create some kind of middle ground? And hopefully that's where we're going to get to. Although, given the images on television the other day, it seems like it's so far away. But I would hope that that's where we're headed.
Well, it's funny. I was going to ask you if you really noticed sort of a softening of positions on this issue. If you seem to find some engagement in your research.
Well, it's frustrating for me because when I talk to people one-on-one, people say, yeah, and again, it's probably a bias because people who want to talk to me will talk to me, right? And people who don't are probably, they don't appear in my book. But I will say that, that a lot of times I would talk to people who were, as I was saying, they would come talk to me in camouflage with AR-15s, and they would also say, by the way, what's the best way to have a gun lock or a gun safe in my house, or have the gun so my kids can't access them. And so I do think there really is this need to figure out, just common sense public safety kinds of stuff. And the problem is, anytime any kind of anytime any kind of middle ground position, like a red flag law, for example, is introduced. I mean, think about a red flag law. A red flag law is, in a way, a compromise position. It's a 30-day restriction on gun ownership usually, but it doesn't take away anybody's Second Amendment rights. Anytime there is some kind of compromise, it just gets swept up in this polarizing debate, and all of a sudden everybody's for or against it. So again, it's a frustration between my life when I talk to people about this on all sides, and the kinds of things that happen in politics and on Twitter, where these issues just seem hopeless and so polarized.
I know we're out of time, but you'll forgive me. Having said that, I'm going to ask a question that you're going to need time to answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. And that is, your book is called Dying of Whiteness, the racial component to gun ownership. Can you speak to it just quickly for a moment?
A 200-year history in this country of basically white Americans having the right and privilege to own weapons. That goes back to before the Civil War, colonial times. Guns were basically symbols of white privilege in public that would suppress, slave revolts or slaves running away, or during the Klan, the night rides and things like that. There's a long history of really this question of who gets to carry a gun in public, and that's a privilege afforded to white Americans. And African Americans like Malcolm X or Robert Williams, who tried to say the Second Amendment applies to me also, were, harassed or shot or tackled or things like that. And so, really this question of who gets to parade around like those men did in Virginia their day, there's a history to that. And I just think it's important to note that if other kinds of people would have had a rally like that, they wouldn't have had the same reception.
Hear, hear. Jonathan Metzl, what a great conversation. I'd love to continue it on my podcast. Can I book him for my podcast? All right, we're going to try to get that going. Again, the book is Dying of Whiteness. Jonathan Metzl, great work, and I look forward to our next conversation. Thank you.
Really my honor. Thanks so much.
On the go? Don't worry, we got you covered. You can still listen to TYT at our new podcast network. Find us on Apple Podcasts, the Google Play Store, or at tyt.com/podcasts.